Newcastle looked pretty goddamn good against Manchester United this weekend. Getting a victory 2-0 against Manchester United. They move into third place now in goal difference. The fight for the top four is well and truly on. Overall, your thoughts on the game? Newcastle, to me, looked very good. My father, Manchester United fan, texted me before the game and said, I'm going to put some money on United. I said, you might as well go in the back garden and burn your money because that is a difficult place to go play.
Oh, man, I've never been so happy to have my mother-in-law in town because I had to watch the game on tape delay. If I had watched it live, I would have thrown a chair through the damn window. And Aaron, thank you for bringing some positivity and some light into my world. Much needed. Horrific weekend for all my teams because I got 19 teams in world football, the top of the barrel being Manchester United. The game was lost in midfield, I think. Newcastle dominated the middle of the park, and two players who were not in that Leagues Cup final didn't get an 11. Joe Willock. It just had to be Joe Willock, the former Arsenal man. For Arsenal players around the world, Balogun, Joe Willock, Bukayo Saka, these guys scoring goals at the weekend. It just has to be just that sort of vibe. I don't like it as a United fan, and I didn't like what I saw. Newcastle, Alexander Isak, United didn't have an answer for him. There was such a mismatch between he and Martinez, and that's been a question mark. At the start of the season, we saw teams dominate against United. Brentford did sort of that sort of thing against the mismatch between Martinez in terms of his height. But Newcastle, there's a bit of a revival, much needed win against United. And I'm worried about this Manchester United run-in. As a United fan, I'm still confident because we still have Casemiro waiting in the wings. We need him. We're dependent on him. But McTominay, not the sort of performance you're expecting after a very good international break. He and Sabitzer can never play again together again. If that happens, I'm going to ask my mother-in-law to come back in town, and I'm not watching the damn game.
Is this not a bit, I'm not going to say ungrateful, Mike, but is it not like maybe over-exaggerating a little bit? Because you look at United's situation in the table, I mean, they're still in the top four, in with a shout of FA Cup success, Europa League as well. So it's, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, I think maybe some people got carried away, sort of a few months ago talking about the possibility of United making a title tilt. I don't think it was ever really that realistic that they'd be in with a shout of really truly challenging Arsenal and Man City. So when you bear in mind that United still have a game in hand over Spurs, which should theoretically keep a place in the top four safe, I don't think it's all that bad, really. I mean, especially if United are to rack up another piece of silverware in either the FA Cup or the Europa League, I still think that would be a really impressive first season for Erik ten Hag. I mean, sure, sort of in isolation, you can look at that result and say it's disappointing or the performance sort of wasn't up to expectations. There's been a couple of those this season at United, but equally, does it really take, a lot of the shine off of what's been quite a constructive debut season so far for the Dutchman?
No, I told you my expectations, and they're still the same. I want top four and the Leagues Cup. That's all I wanted, just to make it marginal, just to be realistic. I know United are in these different competitions, but what I think you're starting to see is the accumulation of games. This is a United team that, even though they're in different competitions, they don't rotate that much. And I think you will see that buildup. And just in transition, Newcastle looked the fresher team, and Marcus Rashford didn't go with England in the international break. But I didn't even notice Marcus Rashford was on the field throughout the 90 minutes. I noticed Weghorst more out of frustration, missing goals left and right again than I did Rashford. That needs to change if United are going to get top four or win any other trophy.
Well, United have got, obviously, Brentford coming up in midweek in the Premier League, and then they have a game against Everton. If you look at Newcastle, what they've got coming up, there's 3 away games coming up for them. They're at West Ham, which is tough. They're at Brentford, which is tough. And then they've got an easy one at Aston Villa on April 15th. Just kidding, JJ. But for me, in particular, as we look at and turn our attention to more the top four battle, I'm actually impressed with Newcastle and what they've done, because I went into that game, as much as we've said, JJ, you pointed out greatly, that United are difficult to beat now. They're not an easy team to beat, whether it's home or away. Newcastle looked fantastic, and I actually went into that game thinking Newcastle are going to turn up here. They haven't played well recently. They need to get back to winning ways, and that fortress that they have at home, if they can bring that week in and week out, which they normally do, it should lead them into a top four place. And the team right now, what Eddie Howe has done with the team is really phenomenal. So I'm really intrigued and I'm excited because really we have a battle now. We have a battle somewhat for obviously winning the title between Arsenal and Manchester City. Would expect obviously Arsenal to win it. But this top four battle is well and truly on. So JJ, who would you expect to be the teams that end up there? Will there be a surprise outside of, let's take away Arsenal and Manchester City as the top two? Who would be the other two teams that do make it into that top four for you? And then Mike, you follow.
I mean, the team that I really think could make a fist of a top four place, given the fact that they've got 2 games in hand over most of the teams around them, is Brighton. The team that I would probably be most worried about dropping out of the race for the top 4 would actually be Spurs. It wouldn't be United. It wouldn't be Newcastle. I think as long as there's this disarray around the club, this lack of, certainty in the wake of Antonio Conte leaving, the longer that goes on, the less chance I think I have for them of finishing in the top 4. So I think it's, pretty pressing now that in terms of urgency, especially with, Chelsea on the lookout for a new manager as well, that Spurs, settle on their number 1 priority, try and get that guy in as soon as possible, or at least have some kind of clarity in terms of where they're moving going forward. But for me, Brighton, I think so much is now going to play on that FA Cup semi-final that they have coming up against United. And depending on the outcome of that, I actually think that Brighton are really going to push to finish in that top 4.
Yeah, I'm very weary as a United fan of Brighton, more so than Spurs, just given the schedule. I know United play Brighton, and Brighton really have a big say in this top 4 because they play all the remaining teams that are in contention with them. Big matchup to come, though. Tottenham Hotspurs versus Brighton. That's one you don't want to miss. Newcastle versus Brighton, I think, is their very next match. So they will have a big say in this top 4 run-in just by direct competition alone. I'm weary in that FA Cup matchup alone against Brighton as a United fan. As I said, when I look at Manchester United, when I look at Newcastle, when I look at Tottenham, when I look at Brighton, Brighton has done the best job of going through that spell where they lost one of their best players in Trossard. They've retained 2 of their best players in McAllister and Caicedo. Well done by De Zerbi and that staff. For United, it's getting Casemiro back and making sure he doesn't get any more red cards. Please, Casemiro, please, I hope you go to therapy. Retain that sense of calm and do not get another red card because we need you. I need you so I don't come and freaking lose my mind on this show as usual.
I mean, I think as well, it's kind of the flip side to that is now with Chelsea and Spurs looking for new managers. And, I know this is kind of like an old record, but, Brighton will be kind of wary of the fact that De Zerbi has that clause in his contract. I think Fab was tweeting about it the other day where, other clubs can come in for him from this summer onwards. So if they're already positioning themselves while this run-in is happening, that's potentially a worry for Brighton. But in terms of the scheduling, the team with the best schedule in terms of finishing in the top 4 is actually Spurs, because Spurs play, I think it's every single one of those teams from 3rd position down to 9th. So they have sort of their fate in their own hands, so to speak, in terms of making sure that they don't drop out of that race, for the top 4. But equally, so much depends on, you've got this interim management team at Spurs at the moment. Stellini kind of in his first experience of really being, the big boss between now and whenever Spurs name their new manager. So I think that is definitely something that's going to play a factor in this race for top 4, because it is still a really good opportunity for Spurs given the games that they have coming up.
We have Amy and we have Rafa in the chat right here. I'm not sure if they're living in the same household here, but they both say Arsenal, Manchester City, Newcastle, and Brighton in that order, and written perfectly as well. So nice to see. Listen, at the end of the day, Brighton still have a big game coming up. I think it's a midweek against Bournemouth, which Bournemouth fighting in relegation. Those are never easy games, by the way. I'm a fan of what they're doing at Brighton. Obviously, De Zerbi doing a great job. But these games, the run-in between Newcastle, of course, and Brighton and Spurs, it'll be interesting to see. I fancy Manchester United finish in the top 4, Mike. So let's calm down a little bit and throw some positivity at that, please.